Hello, everybody. We are sorry and I apologize for being a bit late because we had some technical problems. By the way, we couldn't solve such problems. So let's see if for Michela it will be possible to listening to me and eventually to us. And if we can listen to her. Michela, you are there? You can listen me right now?
I'm here. More or
Okay.
less, I heard what you were saying. So.
Okay. I see that if you are closer to your device, your voice is arriving clearer. So maybe. So we are here for presenting a book that Michela has just published in English. The book is Otherness in a Fragmented World, Psychotherapy in a Contemporary Society. Something about the author, something about the book and the series, and then I will ask you, Michela, some curiosity, some questions that may interest for sure me and maybe also people who are connected with us. Something about the author, about Michela. Michela Gecele is a psychiatrist, a Gestalt therapist. She coordinated a center for psychotherapy and psychiatry for immigrants. And here is already an experience that probably is part of the background of this book. And she is co-director of the International Institute for Psychopathology and Gestalt Therapy. And she's also co-director of the Turing School of Psychopathology, along with Jan Rubal and myself. And she's an international trainer and supervisor and an author. So somehow both the backgrounds from psychotherapy, but also from psychiatry and from meeting people from different cultures are already there in this short biography that I mentioned. Then the book is the first volume of a new series that is published by Routledge, and the title of the series is Field Perspective and Clinical Practice, Gestalt Therapy Book Series. The editors of this series are Michela Gecele, Jan Rubal, and myself. So somehow this is the first book of hopefully a story of books that are addressing specifically from field perspective the clinical practice of psychotherapy and of psychiatry, of course. And if we come more specifically to the book actually is not a big one. It's quite a little book, and that doesn't mean that it is light in the sense that is not dense. I would say is a quite dense book. There is a preface from Jessica Dione, an Italian colleague, psychotherapist, Gestalt psychotherapist with a lot of experience of working with immigrants also. There is the foreword of the English edition by Lynn Jacobs, and then there is a final chapter from Francesco Remotti, who is one of the main contemporary anthropologists. So the voice of Michela is supported, I would say, by these introductions and also by this coda of the book. I like that Lynn Jacobs took a piece of the introduction by Jessica Dione that I'm going to read because it's a way to enter into the book. Jessica Dione presented the book as a journey. The metaphor of journey, of psychotherapy, of life somehow is very present in this book. And she writes that this book is a journey that if we undertake it prepared to be disoriented and with a good dose of patience in finding ourselves again, both the same, this journey can be truly transformative, just as every journey is when worthy of such a name. So, a journey, this book is a journey, psychotherapy is a journey, life is a journey connected to processes of transformation. This book is actually the translation of the Italian version of this book that came out some years ago. I want also to mention the Italian book because the title was different and somehow is the key for entering in asking something to Michela. The title of the Italian book is Gli sfondi dell'alterità, meaning the backgrounds of alterity. So, the first question that I would like to propose you, Michela, is to share with us the backgrounds of this book. I mean, from where and how it was born and prepared and developed to this point. So what are the backgrounds of this book that somehow when we read a book, we meet an alterity somehow. So help us to meet this book by the backgrounds.
Thank you, Gianni, for the presentation. And I hope you hear me. And
yes, we can hear.
I'm afraid that also speaking of the process of the book is a long journey again, because it's a book that I would say started some decades ago. You mentioned my experience in the service for immigrants, and in that period, which is around the 19th, going a bit into the new century. In that period, we also organized some conferences, starting from that service, that experience in working with immigrants. And we had a big conference, multidisciplinary conference. I would say that starting from the proceedings of this conference, which was held, as I said, in the 90s, started the process from about this book, because my intervention in the conference and my chapter in the proceeding was about a kind of, not comparison is not the right word, because we are in different levels of experience and theory, but speaking of Gestalt therapy inside the way we can work with immigrants, comparing with here, yes, we can say comparing with ethnopsychiatrists, ethnopsychoanalysis, and so on. And my main idea there was that while psychoanalysis, even psychiatry, had to kind of get out from themselves to meet different culture, to meet different approaches, to have a different point of view, Gestalt therapy already has inside this multiplicity, this interdisciplinarity, this idea that we can meet only people where people are and not where we want them to be. So that doesn't mean that everything is done for Gestalt therapists, because I think it's a process to become a really kind of Gestalt therapist in the way we maybe should be, even if I don't like using should. But in the theory of Gestalt therapy, there is already a kind of opening and going beyond itself. The idea that even sometimes I put it that way, which is not about the founders of Gestalt therapy, but I think it's implicit in the way they put the theory, that in a way, even psychotherapy is a transient phenomenon, is connected with society, and is not a kind of God and something where all humanity were going to, and we finally found psychotherapy, but it's just one phenomenon of society and culture. So I think in Gestalt therapy we have already this point of view.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you, Michela. I was connecting to what you were saying about the having already into Gestalt therapy theory this perspective that supports us to be decentralized by meeting our clients or by meeting the difference, by meeting the novelty that is always an alternative. The novelty by definition is an alternative. It's something that we meet that is beyond us, is to go to get beyond us. I guess this is very important. And
sorry, now it's really difficult hearing you. Can you repeat just what you were saying?
Yes. I was just saying that I was just somehow commenting that in Gestalt therapy we have this idea of meeting the novelty as a process of growth, and novelty you
I
can't.
cannot hear. Just a moment. I'm trying to
Yes.
move myself and see whether I can hear a bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, can you please repeat? Sorry.
Yes. Can you hear a bit better now?
Yes, a bit better.
A bit better. I was saying that in our modality, the growth comes from meeting the novelty, and novelty is by definition the alterity somehow. So, by the way, is the availability to be disturbed, to be decentralized, to be alterated, by the way. So this is part of it. But it's interesting that one of the slogans of Gestalt therapy have been sharpen the figure, work on the figure, support the clarity of the figure. It seems that you are bringing something different here. So you are focusing the background more than sharpen the figure. Is a big passage in our modality. So even though all this was already in our theory, but you are bringing you are proposing another focus, another attention. Can you say something about this?
Yes, I see that you are a bit smiling, and I'm smiling too, because it's a topic of discussion between the two of us. I mean, we are used to speak of backgrounds, but it is true that maybe something more started with this book, at least when it was published in Italian, which, as you said, it was already some years ago. And I think that in last year, maybe even last month and last weeks and days, both you and me, we are focusing more on how much, even when we work with psychopathology, we are speaking more and more on backgrounds than on figure. And it is true that by now we are almost used to that, and sometimes we forget that it is a big change, because figure and ground process is there from the beginning in Gestalt therapy. But it was exactly that, as you described. It was the very beautiful idea, which is still true. Of course, I don't want to change theory. The beautiful idea was that the figure is presenting itself. No, we don't have to look for it, that the figure is coming, and we can work with the figure inside the session, and that it happens also in life. No? But what we consider nowadays, mostly starting from psychopathology, which is the way people suffer nowadays, is that sometimes this so beautiful process is a bit, I don't like using this word, but just to understand each other, is a bit impaired, is a bit in difficulty. And so it's not so easy that a clear figure is presenting, that we know even in session we work to work. That's, by the way, why we are so much speaking of field theory, because it's a kind of field theory in a way, is the figure and ground process when the figure and ground process is a bit impaired. And so there is not a clear figure, but different forces, sometimes fragmented of forces going around in the field, and we have to catch them in order to let them become maybe a figure. So in this way, there is a kind of more confusion between background and figure. So in a way, the forces of the field are more background, are still inside the background, or are a kind of figure that is not able to totally present itself. It's a kind of in-between. So that's why it's so important to be able to consider also background, even in order to support a figure to come, or sometimes in order, when we are in therapy, when we are working, sometimes in order to stand the frustration of a figure that is coming very late, is not arriving, and we have to stay in the background, in a bit in the darkness, I would say sometimes, in order to wait for something meaningful is coming. A direction is presenting itself. So I don't know whether I answered you, but that's I think is the starting point, actually, the clinical practice. And the clinical practice makes us observe more the world, the society, and then we go back to clinical and so on. So.
Yes, I think that what you are saying is very important. From one side, field perspective implies to pay attention to the backgrounds. And then you said, starting from the clinical work, to pay attention to the backgrounds has become very, very important. So the question would be, but there were other moments in psychotherapy and psychoanalysis where to focus the backgrounds more, it was not so meaningful. Why today is so meaningful? The backgrounds have changed, the clinical work has changed. What would you consider as a change that makes this so relevant to focus today?
But for sure, that is my answer, or maybe that is my answer of today now, because there can be very different answer. And I think what is more important is a topic of discussion. So it's not that I have the reality, a truth to be given. It's just a point of view. For me, it's a bit paradoxical, but it's not paradoxical if we think of Gestalt therapy. Because maybe if somebody listen to us, not a Gestalt therapy, listen to us now, think, okay, the figure is not so meaningful. That means that the background is very meaningful, it's very strong. But inside Gestalt therapy, we know that the process as they are two polar of the same process, they are kind of supporting or impairing each other, if you want to use that. So actually, a weak figure comes from a weak background and vice versa, and go back to a weak background. So it's not that the background is strong and the figure is weak, but that everything is quite weak, which is the in-between, actually, because we know that the figure and ground process is another way we can call the self, we can call the contact boundary, we can call the process of living, and actually both the figure and the ground are a bit weak nowadays, because it's the in-between which is weak. As if when Lasch spoke of a narcissistic society, he was kind of tracing a pace that nowadays has gone much farther, because there it was only, okay, we are a bit narcissistic, the society has this kind of forces, but there was a lot of society yet still. There was a lot of in-between, there was a lot of roles and so on. But the more a society is narcissistic and the more is made of individuals, separated individuals, and the less the common ground, what is in between the person is becoming present, is becoming weak. And so it's as if in a fragmented society, liquid societies, as nowadays society is called, or even in different way, but just to give some example, it is as if the society is not present anymore, I'm a bit exaggerating, and it is made of island, as in an ocean, and there are only some island coming out, and there is nothing, not even the ocean in between. So that means that it's more difficult to communicate, it's more difficult to be in relationship, it's more difficult to be present, and so on. So all this background, all this in between is weak, and that means that also the figure have difficulty in forming themselves because of the figure form themselves against a background, starting from a strong background. I don't know if it is clear and if it's what you meant by your question.
So from a very weak background, figure have difficulties to emerge, and I would add, coming back to your book, also to be remembered, as there is not only the difficulty to emerge, but also to the difficulty to persist, to leave a footprint, to have a shape that remains as a kind of loyalty in our life. So I was wondering, in this scenario that you are describing and that we have explored together many times, but I think it's worthy to come back to this in this place, in this moment connected to your book, because there is a chapter also addressing this. In this scenario that you are describing, what is the clinical issues that are emerging? I mean, you said and you wrote that the psychopathology is prophetic. Our clients are bringing a message of what is happening into the world. So from this scenario, what is the clinical that we meet and we can expect to meet?
Yes, thank you for this question too. Before answering it, I will go back, as you said, to the book, because starting from what we were sharing now, I would say that the book, and that is why the Italian title, The Backgrounds of Alterity, and the plural of backgrounds, it's not background, it's backgrounds, as if this kind of fragmented pieces has to be put together, different kind of background. And we are exploring in the book, I am exploring the background of language, the background of novelty, the background of alterity, the background of, as you said, even about roles, memory, shared view on reality. All these are backgrounds which are explored in the book because they are so important and so lacking, so at risk nowadays. And yes, as you said, the psychopathology is kind of prophetic because it's showing us not only what is more at risk, what issues are more involved in as problems, as difficulty nowadays in a given society, but it's prophetic even in the positive way of showing a way, saying, okay, we can go beyond that, maybe doing this kind of effort. So this idea of a prophetic role of psychopathology, for me, and I know also for you, is very important. And also, as I say also in the book, in a way, we as professional, not only as Gestalt therapists now, in general as professional, we are kind of touched by the prophetic role of our clients. We have a little prophetic role too, because we bring the same problems. We take the problems from our clients, we see them, we consider what is going on in society, and so we are part of this. And I like in the book saying that the professional live not at the center of a society, but at the boundaries.
Say again.
In the banlieue,
We lost you for a while. So could you repeat just the last sentence, because
okay.
it was not possible to hear.
Yes, I don't know where, but what I was saying that is that we as professionals, we are part of the prophetic roles of our client. We are touched by it. We are involved in it. And so it's as if we live at the boundaries. We live not in the center of our culture, in the meaning that we are not so sure, oh, that is the best culture, or the best idea of society, and so on. But we are always a bit at the border, in the neighborhood, I would say, of our society. And so we have this kind of prophetic role too, and sometimes we don't correspond so much to what society would like us to do, because we are involved in the same kind of vision as our client. So that for me is very important. And then, yes, when if we speak, you said before something about memories, Gianni, about roles, I was speaking of what is missing in between, about the background and so on. That means that narrations, that means that personality function is very much involved, is very much in difficulty in this, in building shared narration, to give meaning to the experience and so on, to give roles, public roles, institutional roles to the people and so on. So there is a lot to be done to support the personality function if we use the Gestalt therapy language. We know that personality function should be a supporting one. But if it is not supported, there are a lot of problems, and that's why we are working so much with what we could call kind of the clinics of personality, as the title of the book will become also in this series, speaking of landscape and weathers, which means different personality dimension and so on, because nowadays that is so much present as a problem, because again, is a kind of metaphor, is a possible explanation. Somebody can not agree. I'm very glad if they are not. But what we could say is that, very simply put, is that if we are in a fragmented society, kind of island, individual island, and so on, there is not so much in between. That means that there is not a kind of protective net between public and private life. There is not this kind of containment that gives us, okay, I'm a doctor, and first of all, I'm a doctor. Then I am Michela, I am nice or weak or strong or ugly or whatever, but first of all, I'm a doctor. That was the way at Freud times most of the things went on. So there was very clear roles. Nowadays, it's much more important my way of being, my way of dressing, my way of showing on the social and so on. If I am able to speak with people or not, if I am ironic or not, and so on. It's much more important, much more visible than my role, than my work, and so on. And so there is this kind of confusion between public and intimate, and that means that our intimate part, which is the way of being, the way of to relate to the other, the way to consider otherness and the risk of relationship and the need of relationship and so on, is becoming in foreground and not in the background. And so we have to work with this, and that is becoming the most of psychopathology we find nowadays. So the way people are, and not so much only symptoms and illnesses and so on. That is what I would say. Of course, also about symptoms and illnesses, there is a given shape nowadays which is different from some decades ago, and we could speak of depression, panic attacks, and so on, and how their shape is changing all the time.
Yeah, by the way, so one of the important elements of working is working on the personality function that is not a granted background, but is something that is must be addressed as a figure because it's already in figure, because there is a lot of emptiness there. There is not that network of social bonds that stabilizes personalities. By the way, it's interesting that And these are what we call the landscapes, the personalities. By the way, it's interesting that some of the most, let's say, also liquid, fluid, ever-changing weathers are often the depression, the anxiety or panic, or the obsession. And these are indeed weathers that are very much frequent when there is not a social network of bond that keep together the personality. So connection and disconnection, exposure, overexposure, chaos are always there. And so these weathers are very frequent. I guess that your take on the focusing the backgrounds, I think is very important to understand this change in psychopathology too, Michela.
Yes, because I want to repeat it again. The book is not a book on psychopathology. It's a kind of book what is behind all
Yes.
the backgrounds of all the social that make it this kind of suffering, this kind of support needed, and so on.
It's much more on how these processes that are processes of life, of figure background, alterity, and myself, and all the process of assimilation of the novelty are part of human life. And this, of course, is also the background of psychopathology, yes. There is another, you mentioned as a background language just a while ago, and in the book there is a chapter on language, on narrative, translation, and I know that this is part of one of your interests, language and translating and narrations. By the way, you are also an author of crime stories. So you are yourself a narrative author, by the way, beside being a doctor. and it's, I guess it's not by chance that also in our foundational book there is a chapter of language. I think we are the only modality with a chapter of language in a basic book of a psychotherapeutical approach. So what is for you so important about this issue, about language and narratives and translations?
Well, first of all, yes, I thank you for the question. Yes, it's true that language is very important, and actually in the book there is not one but two chapters on language, because there is one chapter about translation and one chapter about language. Of course, translation is not only meant about translating language; it's more complex than that. But actually, it is two chapters. And what I like underlining is that the chapter about translation is before and not after the chapter of language, because in a way that my thesis, which is not so original by the way, but in this book, speaking of language, is that translation comes before language. In a way, language is already a translation. And what is important about language, whatever kind it is that it is at the border, that it is, again, it is in between. It's not about me. The language is already about you. The language is about, I want to say something to you. So there is already a process there. And every language, every moment in which we speak, we are already translating. We are already trying, and without being totally successful, we are never successful in trying to explain what we want to explain. So it's always an attempt to reach the other and to say something, or at least to produce an effect, to give a meaning, to build a bridge, whatever we want to call it. And so that is why for me it's so important to speak of translation, because it explains, even as a metaphor, in a very good way, both the beauty and the difficulty of the human being, of being together. We, as human being, that is another basis for the book, that we cannot live alone. Our life is a social life. A human being is not able to live alone, even from childhood. We are not born we are not able to live alone. And so there is this continuous beautiful effort to build something together, to reach the other, and at the same time there is this effect, frustration, and which is we never really totally reach the other. And so even again, when we speak of field perspective, we speak of co-construction in therapy, actually we are saying that what we can do is, in a way, is just to produce something new. Because when we are together, we are trying to meet. I'm trying to explain you something, you are trying to answer me. But actually what I'm saying and what you are answering is not what I thought, what I wanted to say, and you are not answering me about what is in your mind, but it's already transformed by my word, by my presence, and vice versa. So there is this beautiful idea that translation is a process which is life again, which is a kind of border process, a kind of contact process. And so that is why it is so important and so meaningful. And
yeah, it's very
and also
clear.
because it is made, it's interesting because language is made of body, is made of breath, is made of our body, and at the same time is made of our soul, if we want to call it like that, brain or whatever, and is me, but it is not me, as I was saying before. So that's the kind of a kind of reality and also metaphor at the same time of the human condition.
I think it's a wonderful example what you underline of the language being already a phenomenon of the between. It doesn't belong to the speaker nor to the listener. Is really a phenomenon that is there in the between. There is an element that you underlined when you said is always an attempt to reach the other. It's always a creative one because it's not what you planned before that is happening, and is an attempt that cannot be fully successful. I underline this because one of the elements that were focused by Lynn Jacobs in the introduction is that this book is a support for humbleness. And I guess that there is this humbleness of not having never a definitive truth. And I wonder if this is the way you can look at this kind of humbleness. That is a humbleness, I guess, towards life in front of the complexity of life, but also the humbleness in front of our client. But I would say that is less mentioned humbleness in relation also to our colleagues from different perspectives. So I want, let's say, stimulate you about this element of humbleness, in which way you recognize it.
Yes, otherness means that we are not closed and finished in ourselves, that we are not these individuals, isolated individuals, as I was saying, as a kind of provocation before. Because, it comes to my mind because it is very clearly said there. It comes to my mind cultural anthropology as a discipline, because what they say, they notice very clearly, is that there is a big difference between little society and big societies. I mean, when I say little society, for example, a kind of a community living in the forest and made of 500 people. And when I say a big society, we can think, for example, of China or the States, very big group of people. So it's very clear that if we are in a community of 500 people inside a forest, we cannot avoid thinking that the world doesn't finish with us. I mean, there is a big otherness somewhere or everywhere. And we have to try to adjust to that otherness if we want to survive. So there will be different languages, different way of living, different way of eating, different way of whatever. And so it's part of our culture, of our society to know that. It's impossible not to be aware. If we live in the center of China or the States, uh, we could even not be aware that there are other languages in the world. We could even not be aware that there are other possible ways of being human, in the meaning that we don't need it, because we are surrounded by a lot of people who are used to our same habits and so on. Of course, I'm exaggerating because there is a variety in every society, but just to so the more society is little, the more needs to be aware of otherness. That is that there is nothing natural in humanity because the way of thinking, living, even the way we make our body to be, the way we eat, the way we relate to each other in family and so on. There is not only one way. It's not, nothing is natural. Everything is cultural. But if we live in a big society, we don't need that. And that is the same for human being, for single human being. So the more we are maybe professionally, maybe because the way we think and so on, the more we stay at the boundary, the more we are aware and we know that in order to grow, in order to live, we have continuously to meet otherness. If not, we can try to make a world made only of similarity and in a way only of ourselves in a specular way, without really meeting otherness and without really living, I would say.
I guess that with this, thank you very much for your answer. I guess that with this, it comes back some of topics that are very important for you, that we could call the complexity, that implies an unavoidable difference and differentiation. And we have maybe a couple of minutes more, and I would address all this topic from one more perspective, that you are a trainer, we are trainers, and you have written a book on this issue in order to stimulate a dialogue and an awareness in our community. But my question is, how it is possible to train this perspective? What are the challenges that you find in training? I was wondering how to train the backgrounds of alterities. What are the challenges? What is difficult for you? And what is important when you teach in order to not to lose this perspective that doesn't take for granted the backgrounds?
Well, of course, we can go very far with this question because we could say we can teach cultural anthropology, we can teach to go back to our own history and to be aware of all the passages, maybe even the history of our family. When I used to work in the Center for Immigrants, and I did a lot of training process for school, for example, I noticed that many students say, "Oh, my family, no immigration process," and then it came out that one grandmother was Greek, another one was French, and then they came all from Australia. I'm exaggerating now, but this kind of thing. So sometimes there is no awareness of our changes in love. We cannot see that the differences because we are more used to see a kind of common phenomenon. But I would say, to put it very simply, that the way we teach and we learn in Gestalt therapy, and maybe in most of the approach nowadays, which is a group way of working, a group training, that is already a big training for difference, because our idea, and mostly working in a field perspective, is that each voice of the group is important. And we see so much that when we work together, the perspective, the point of view are so different, or maybe on the same process, on the same clinical situation and so on, are so different that we would never imagine if we would not be there. And see that for me, that makes me irritated, and you are falling asleep and the other is just laughing and so on. And that is one little example, but very important example of how different we are and how precious that is, how rich that is to give different contribution to the same life.
Yeah. Yes, I guess that this brings also the value of not only of differences, but implies the value of minorities. I'm mentioning this because one of the elements that are emerging from the book, but for me are emerging from knowing you from many decades, is how attention you put to support what is different, what is weird, what is at the fringe of the situation, what emerge as a minority. I guess that this is also part of the message of this book, and this is also part of the way you and we are trying to train.
Yeah. Yes, I think that's a good closure.
I think that's a good closure. Yes, it's a good closure also because it comes back to our founders to support the next, and the next usually comes up by challenging the common established ground and as a voice of difference instead of a voice of majority. So I guess that this is part of an important message from the book for our clinical work, but also for our world and life. So thank you very much, Michela, and once more, otherness in a fragmented world.
By the way, it should be published also in ebook. It starts from April. So.
Yes, this is the book.
Thank you very much, Gianni. You who was or will be listening, and sorry for some problem of translation, by the way, communication because of the
humbleness of life. Yes, despite of the technology. Thank you, Michela. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you again.